Hi, welcome to Perri Pierre podcast. I am your host, Perri Pierre, and this is our sixth episode. Our guest today is again Peter Ellinas. Peter, I'm happy to have you back. Today we're gonna talk about the representation of gang members in the media. But before I start, Peter, how you doing?
Doing good, doing good. Happy to be back. I think was I on the first episode or second episode or something like that?
You were on the first episode, yeah, when we talked about Reaganite cinema.
Reaganite cinema. That's right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. It was. Let me tell you something. Actually, this is my most listened episode, the first one. So that's
Really?
good news. Yep.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, that's good news. Anyway, so Peter is a filmmaker. For the people who didn't hear the first episode, and I would say a scholar. He got his MFA from Pepperdine University, and yeah, you've made some research on gangs in the U.S. and how they're represented in the media. You've read like many books. So tell me, what was it that fascinated you about that specific subject?
Well, it's interesting. Like you said, I did a research paper on it and went through something like I think 22 or 23 books on it and articles. It's kind of fast. I actually don't know if I ever told you this.
Mm-hmm.
So for your listeners as well, when I was going to write this paper, it was Dr. Satchel in our media literacy class, and she asked me what I wanted to do, and I told her that I was interested in exploring media representation of gangs, basically American street gangs, let's call them. And she said to me, "Well, what would interest you about that, and what kind of where it started?" And I said to her, "Well, I took a class in corrections when I was an undergrad, corrections on the prison system." And she wasn't. I remember she's a great teacher, but she wasn't quite sure where I was going to go with the paper. But it's
Yeah.
funny because I took this class in undergrad, and it always stayed with me. It wasn't a good class. We learned some interesting things, but I was actually taught by an ex-NYPD officer, and it was just kind of interesting. There's something she said to me in that class that was just so interesting to me, and I'm sure it's very timely now, of course, with everything that's going on, right? We're kind of seeing a lot of this stuff today. But she said something. She said that, if somebody killed a cop or shot a dog, right, one of the canine unit dogs, then the police department would enact revenge on that person, right? They would be, I think she said, pumped full of lead or something like that. And, she said they were going to seek their own justice. And I remember thinking to myself, that sounds so wrong in so many ways. And I remember thinking, that's kind of very unconstitutional. And it just got me really thinking. And again, we did some interesting things. Like we learned about the Stanford prison experiment, stuff like that, really fascinating. But it just got me really kind of debating and thinking, well, where do all these kind of different subcultures fit in a kind of the history of America? And something I was just debating, it was something like 5-6 years later, something like that, maybe a little less, that I got the opportunity to finally kind of write about that and research that. And by then I'd really narrowed it down to, well, I was kind of very interesting. Well, if that happens, right, where does the kind of American street gang kind of fit in all that kind of as a subculture? And then it became, obviously being a film guy and a media guy, it became about, well, how does media interpret that, right? How does media show that, and how are they depicted? How is that subculture depicted? And so that's really kind of where I got really interested about it. And yeah, I kind of related back to that. I actually, did I don't know if did I ever tell you that? Did I ever tell you that story?
No, I mean, you told me you took the class, and you told me you took the class, but you didn't tell me what she said and and the whole backstory of it. But it's quite fascinating, and I think it's a great way, I guess, to something that can like motivate you to kind of like learn more about it.
I mean, and I'll tell you, some of the research, I mean, so, all to be completely honest, I went in because I took that class. I had years thinking about it. I was kind of thinking about, what section I wanted to research, but it was so fascinating to me actually reading the material and, watching the movies, right? Watching the stuff as well. And, just kind of understanding kind of what it's about. And I just think it's so, and how it affects, of course, public policy, which is today, which is mainly what we're talking about today.
Right.
And, you know, I just think it's so interesting, you know, how, you know, that it's, you know, we've of course we've talked about, you know, there's slavery in our founding fathers and how corrupted that is, and how, you know, systemic racism actually exists in America. But an area that I didn't quite know was this whole idea about urbanization and social disorganization, and the rise of how, you know, urban America rise, you know, people flocking to cities to get more work, and then the creation of suburban America, right? And it pushed people who were already suffering of systemic racism, basically a disenfranchised group. It further disenfranchised them. And, you know, comes the creations of projects and stuff like that. And I think it's so fat. It also kind of goes back to Reagan cinema, you know, we're kind of linking it back to our first chat. You know, you have Reagan cinema around in the 80s where, you know, movies are trying to depict, you know, going back and changing what the 80s are, right? So the whole thing about Reagan was about kind of going back to the good old days, right? And, you know, I know we've talked to Craig, one of our professors always said this as well. But you've seen movies, you know, like Back to the Future, one of my favorite movies, just for fun, really. But, you know, Back to the Future, about him literally going back in time. His 1980s are no good, right? His 1980s, coming off the Jimmy Carter years, weak, no good, has a horrible life. He literally goes back to the 50s, which are great, you know, tweaks and changes the 50s. So now 1980s, it's a really good period. You know, in comes Reagan, really good period. So, you know, it's really about this going back in time, back to the 1950s. And I just think it's really fascinating because, and I know, like I said, we know Craig have said it before, you know, it was really good for some, not for all.
Not
right?
for all.
Again, you're forgetting this disenfranchised group. So yeah, urbanization, suburban America, the American dream, really good for some, not for all. And just kind of a quick point as well. I don't think not a lot of people talk about this, but I don't think we realize, and not to get too political, we don't realize what kind of a racist sentence "Make America Great Again" really is, right?
Of course, I know what's behind it and everything, but absolutely.
But it's so interesting, you know, about trying to make it back to the Reagan era, which then goes back to the 50s, which
I mean, the you know, great again, great could mean so many other things. You know, some people say, you know, make America great again is like make America white again, or make them, you know, make this again, you know, stuff like that. So you know, there's a lot of like politics and a lot of like other stories behind the great in Make America Great Again that our president currently uses. Currently uses a lot. But so let's talk about entertainment value a little bit. Because in the paper you mentioned that oftentimes what the media would do, like what they would do in movies, what they would do at, you know, in TV shows and everything else, is that there is always an exaggeration of gang members. You know, do you want to touch on that a little bit? And, you know, why do you think that is? I mean, you know, like what's so fascinating for the media to always exaggerate how violent gang members are?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, it kind of all goes back to this, right? So, you know, again, talking about that urbanization, social disorganization, you know, the kind of the non-dominant group needed to kind of have a sense of creating a sense of protection, right? Protection against, you know, systemic racism, against police brutality, and kind of where's the stem of gangs. But the problem is, anytime you create an American subculture, the mainstream media and you know, the dominant groups get really afraid of what that subculture is. So, you know, what happened with gangs, you know, and we have to, you know, I'm not condoning violence or anything, but we have to be, what happened eventually was, so things were happening here in the United States where the media would blame gang members, right? They say, a gang did this or a gang did that, with no evidence whatsoever.
And it's like they even blame gang members for riots, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, we can touch on that kind of modern day riots too, and protests. But what I was going to say was that they were blaming gang members on this. And, you know, and even again, talking with Dr. Satchel, gangs were a lot of times originally created as a sense of protection and community. And so they're being blamed on this. And, you know, the media tropes and stereotypes are going back to the original the original stereotypical, talk about those original racist films like Song of the South and stuff like that. They were taking those stereotypes and extending it, and just building off of that. And so the media was doing that basically. And if you go, again, Fox, CNN, all of them, they were showing and trying to build a certain stereotype to really invoke fear within the mainstream society. The mainstream media is trying to invoke fear for people, saying like, hey, if we don't have this and we don't have that, look what's going to happen. So you have basically two things going on at the same time. You have this, we have racism that stems back against the founding fathers happening. And then you have media, films, literature, all these things that are basically stereotyping people's fears, and you're running them at the same time. And then what ends up happening is you have people who are, sure, systemic racism there, but people who are, even if they don't think they're racist, they're built in a racist society. And then they are then seeing images from books and TV and media. And then that's what they think is happening. And then they create public policy. So it's kind of where we are kind of right now. And what ends up happening, what I was going to say, what ends up happening too, is that you have really false stereotypes in the media being created. But then what happens, because people are they're solely badly treated, is that they then, gangs end up doing is that they actually start to take the coded message that the media is giving them and kind of use it to their advantage. Right. So they also use it. So it becomes, and I'm not saying gangs are innocent, right? That's not
right. Of course not.
We're not saying that, but what we're saying is that they then take the message that is already being, given to everybody else by the media, and then they then use the message to their advantage. Right.
Yeah.
So
I think it's, what's interesting here is like, just to show you how important and how influential the media is. You know what I mean? Like, it's already portraying like a negative stereotype about like a gang member, and the gang member takes it. It's like, that's what I am. That's what I'm going to do.
Absolutely. And social media too, and social media as well. I didn't really touch on social media in my paper. I did it a little bit towards the end, but social media is one of the most prominent things now that is kind of used, right? And the basis, the problem is, and not only with media, we're talking about also films and music and stuff like that, right? That's also happening at the same time. I'll give you an example. I think recently, to be honest, something that's really bothered me, and I have to say, it's been on it. I'm happy because I don't think the media's really run with this, but everything that's going on with the protests, right? I got really kind of not annoyed, but kind of really worried about this when people started saying stuff like, well, it must be, when protests were happening, some riots were happening and whatever. Well, it must be people from outside, right? It must be anarchists coming in. It must be other people coming in and causing problems. And while it sure can be the case, right? We've seen that happened. I got really scared that the media was trying to create the message that, that this is, it's us versus them again, right? It's us versus them. That it's not that people are upset. It's not that people want to burn down the institutions that have held them back for so many years. And I'm not just talking about people of color. I mean, the protests were surrounded with that, but we're talking about educational status. We're talking about social status. We're talking about so many things. But then again, the media was trying to say, well, it's people from the outside, it's anarchists, right? It's white supremacists, it's Antifa, it's people coming in trying to cause problems, and that's what's happening. Instead of actually asking the real question, does it work? Does the U.S. work? Does that, to quote the great Cornel West, I heard him speak in college, does the social experiment of the U.S. actually work? And if you remember with the whole Minneapolis, when they said they arrested people in Minneapolis, about 80% of the people were not from Minneapolis. That you heard that on the news a lot. And then it came out later that wasn't the case, right? Then that wasn't true.
Yeah.
So and the media hasn't really run with it, but I thought it was another interesting thing where, again, the media was saying, instead of asking the tough questions, and they did do that, right? Let's be fair. People like Don Lemon, who I think are great, did do that. But instead of, they were kind of playing with this idea, it must be outside people, right? It must be somebody from the outside. So once again, it's kind of us versus them, right? We can't ask the tough questions. And I just think that's something that's kind of called back to gangs when they were saying, well, it's not everybody, right? It's this specific gang people are doing these violence. Specific gangs are doing, it's the Bloods and the Crips. They're doing this violence. That's how we need police to be on top of them. And that's how we need all these strict policies, right? So it was just kind of an interesting thing that I kind of saw that kind of linked together with what's happening now.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in the book, it was from something you got from Covey's book, Crips and Blood, is that the idea that most gangs are organized around committing crimes is false. So you want to touch up on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was like I kind of said at the beginning as well. A lot of gangs were created because of social disorganization, and a lot of times they were actually used as protection against police brutality and the kind of the systems that were in place. But again, like I said, anytime you create a kind of a subculture, the system wants to attack you. You must not be able to be living in this American dream, right? So something has to be wrong. So yeah, a lot of gangs were portrayed as being, I mean, you take most films, that a lot of gangs were actually being portrayed as these kind of really vicious, violent, let's use what, the president said, thugs, right?
Thugs, right, yeah.
And let's be fair, that wasn't really the way it started. But again, gangs used the message, right? They used it.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Of course they used it. But and you read in my paper as well, a lot of times, it was around this idea that it was economic status, right? That they were making a lot of money, or the big gang identity, where it's the bigger the gang, the more strong it is. When really it was just kind of, a lot of times people were kind of hanging out in social groups. And
like drinking and just having a good time. Right.
Yeah, that's really what it was. But again, if you see almost any film, and like I said, again, even great films like Boys in the Hood or Menace to Society or even Straight Outta Compton, right? Which are kind of really talk about the experience. And there was an experience there. Let's never kind of put that down. There was an experience of there was violence that people didn't want to be involved in. But that's not what just kind of saying, it's not what I would say half of the 60% or 70% of the time was. And, a lot of times these movies and media were really depicting these things as a well-oiled, machine that was violent machine that was out to ruin white people's way of life, right? And it really wasn't that. It was more just kind of rooted in the community. I always think and you really saw it, but what's kind of interesting is that, and I wrote in the paper too, the way people handled it was really bad, right? A lot of times in small towns, police would deny that they had something, but if they assumed that there was a gang problem, then they would overact, right? Which we see now, that's what's happening 100% of the time. Overreact, and then they will misidentify, right? So that's when it becomes, oh, why are you stopping me, officer? Somebody stole a car that fits your description. What's the description? A young black man in his 20s and 30s.
It's like, there's like,
what is that?
There's like a million.
Yeah, exactly. What is that? That's every, what I mean? That's where gangs really kind of, where the media, really depict gangs in such a violent way that police officers would then, in turn cap police brutality. And of course there's systemic racism there, right? So it's like I said, these two things kind of happening at the same time. What I think is interesting, as I was going to mention, Straight Outta Compton, right? Starts with Eazy-E going into the house, and that in itself is kind of a stereotypical trope, right? Because he goes into the house, they're doing a drug deal, right? It's all it's organized, right? So that in itself I kind of criticize, because again, it's kind of setting a stereotype. But then what happens? The police show up in a tank and blow the house down, right?
Completely.
Yeah. Five people in the house, they show up with a tank and blow the house. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting, because while you have that kind of stereotype at the beginning, you then have the overreaction, so big overreaction on the other side. It was kind of an interesting way to open the film, I thought.
Yeah. So so do you think that the media is partly to blame for police brutality because of the different ways that they portray?
Oh yeah, for sure.
African American men and stuff
for sure. For sure. Well, for sure. And here's what I'd say: and as I said at the beginning, we this all goes back to slavery and the founding fathers, right? It all goes back there. And, I think people really now recognize, George Washington owned slaves and Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. And the system from the beginning, wasn't, until, about Lincoln, the system from the beginning was broken, right? John Adams, who was against slavery, didn't do anything about slavery, though, because he didn't want to upset these Southern Democrat politicians, right? He wanted to keep the Union together. Mm-hmm. So he didn't want to, this was a hot topic for over 100 years. So yes, you have systemic racism going throughout society. But like I said in the beginning, what I think is interesting is that when you have introduction of literature and media and pictures and images, right? You have these two things going side by side, and the images are reaffirming their already stereotypical ideas and their racist ideas. And, the media definitely has a part to play in it, because violence was happening. They were doing that to stoke fear in, the dominant society. And then what happened was those people would then go create, they were so scared, they would go create public policy. So absolutely the media has a big part to play. Now, what I would say that's interesting is that now in the country, we're having kind of a little bit of a change, because, we're all seeing videos on media. We're seeing videos of police brutality, and now there's kind of an outcry of it, right? So it's just kind of interesting where the media was really stoking the fears. And a lot of times, there's a lot of research out there to say that they, the whole Bloods and Crips, right? That they played, that was really, really created in the media, right? The kind of feud between them. And it kind of got worse. The media kind of played up on it. And where the media kind of did that, as time has gone on now, the media is kind of not great, but kind of correcting itself and now showing police brutality. Not all of it, right? We only see certain things of it, and showing this police brutality, which then causes, people to take action. So, I mean, it's a fascinating question, because yes, the media absolutely has a blame on it, but then,
there's also other stuff going on.
Yeah. We're now people using the media to their advantage. Right.
Right.
So I agree. There definitely media has a blame in it, but also people are using it now kind of to their advantage. But again, it's all, every time you take the media, and I say this about documentary filmmakers, anytime I watch documentary, you're only seeing though kind of one, you're only seeing one part. Same thing with my paper, right? You only see one section, only see one thing of it. And you can never trust things like that. You always have to do outside research and try to form a full opinion, right? Because
usually that's how it's gonna be. It's like, kind of like a lot of the times like one-sided.
And the problem is people are reading stuff. They read stuff. There's a lot of fake stuff out there too, and they're reading stuff and they're not forming opinions, or they're watching Fox News, right? And they're only getting one side. I mean, and things get distorted, right? So you have to really, really do research really into kind of everything, to be honest.
There's always something behind it. So during the research, did you have a chance to kind of like touch up on how white gangs are portrayed in the media as well?
I mean, to be honest, not really. I mean, it's interesting about white gangs. Very much exists, right? Neo-Nazis, white supremacy is very much a gang in a lot of ways. The problem is, one of the biggest problems is that scholars really haven't even decided what a gang means, right? I think if you read that in my paper, the scholars haven't even actually come to the decision of what a gang actually means. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, while there is white supremacy and there is neo-Nazis out there, which I would constitute maybe a quote unquote violent gang, the media's, certainly didn't talk about it in the 80s and didn't really talk about it in the 90s. And, they were not talking about it as much as they were, African-American and Latino street gangs. Right. And that's because, just what I found in my research, that's because the audience that were watching the media and the news were trying to appeal to a demographic that wasn't, gangs, right? They're trying to appeal to white middle-aged or white middle-class people. So they're in, they didn't want to show you white gangs. They wanted to show you, oh, look how bad the Bloods and the Crips are. Look how violent it is. And that's why we need to have whatever.
That's why we need to get them out.
That's why we need to be very strict and have certain policies, and things got worse. In 1978, the Proposition 13 here in California basically ended after school programs and education and kind of low income neighborhoods, which, left a lot of people, again, disenfranchised. So
I read that too. I think it's crazy because yesterday I was thinking, actually, it's funny how Hollywood celebrities are always almost they're always ready when there is something, even if it's not going in California or even if it's not going on in the US, to say, hey, we need to do something about this. We need to do this. We need to do that. When often California, which is where they live, or like LA County, LA County has a lot of problems. Like if you think about like you said, after school programs for our youth, like some schools in LA County are like pretty bad, or like even homelessness, right? That's like, I mean, I've been to many counties in the US, but LA County has a lot of homeless people. You know what I mean? And I'm pretty sure all of these celebrities, if they got together and then say, hey, listen, we want to meet up with the mayor of LA or with the governor because we need to address this. We need to find a solution. Like, why are there so many people on the streets? How can we help them? How can we help them get back on their feet? So
I mean, look, man, I don't have a lot of faith in Hollywood.
I know, especially lately.
Here's what I'd say, man, about Hollywood. And it's interesting because, again, if you watch CNN, Don Lemon called a lot of them out.
Right.
I think what we forget I think we put a lot of responsibility on Hollywood, right? We say Hollywood because of the media, because of the films, right? Because we get our information from movies and shows, and that's where we kind of learn about the world, right?
Right.
And I think we put a lot of responsibility on Hollywood, expecting these people to, now in times of crisis, they need to come to our aid and show us the philosophical way forward. The problem with Hollywood, man, Hollywood has as many problems with systemic racism as every other industry in America.
And that's what
Hollywood
I'm saying too.
Hollywood was built on problems. It still has problems. Every head of a studio production company here is a 60-plus-year-old man.
White men too, for that matter.
Almost no women on any of the boards. Nothing. There's nothing. Right. So, I mean, and the thing you have to understand about celebrities, what my kind of understanding of it, just kind of living here in LA and kind of working in the industry a little bit, my thing about it is that these celebrities, man, they have brands, right? They have brands to protect. Again, I think we put these celebrities on such a pedestal, when really they're protecting a business, right? They are a business. They are a brand.
Yep.
And they're protecting that brand, and they will say things that make their brand more popular. They will say things that their brand is right. And I think that, and again, for them to get up and start talking and treat as if people who are watching the shows or watching are in some ways uneducated about this is kind of ridiculous. That's why I go back to not to be an elitist, but again, a lot of them haven't experienced schooling, haven't experienced education. And you can get that anyway by exploring the world, but a lot of them don't have that. And I mean, who are they to tell us about the world and a call to action, right? And we've seen that in the protests where most of them were extremely quiet, right? For the first half of the protest. Only after people half,
a lot of them were like, we're not seeing anything at all.
Yeah, it's until like Don Lemon. I saw Don Lemon. I was watching a show, and he called them out, right? And then the next day, everybody was talking. And
because but that's the thing too. But here's how I feel though. I feel like, imagine you're the head of a company, like a movie company, production company in Hollywood, right? And then you're saying, listen, Black Lives Matter. We need to end discrimination. This and this and that, right? when your company only has 1% of Black people. So wouldn't your message be a little bit like, what exactly are you saying here? You're not even doing this at your own company. So I think that's where I feel like there is like
systemic racism. Hollywood is embroiled with it, and the problem is it doesn't know right now. Hollywood doesn't know where it's going to go. That's their because the problem is you still again I say 60-plus-year-old white men and no women on boards. One or two women here and there on boards who have control, and they don't want to let control go, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to hire writers, hire task forces. They're going to, change things, block things. I completely agree with, first of all, I completely agree with all that. Just personally, I completely agree with all that. But they're not going to do the real change and say, you know what, hey, I'm going to step down. Let's completely restructure our entire company, right? Because we need to change everything. Let's restructure everything. They're not going to do that. They're just going to hire people. And I always get annoyed because Hollywood always makes things that they think people want, right? Because they're a business. They're trying to sell stuff, right? They're going to make things that what people want. They're going to stuff it down our throats, and they're going to think that's what people want. But anytime there's a movement away from that, they're going to stop making it, right? Like I always say stuff like, nobody asked for Elmer Fudd not to have a gun, right? I think that's and I'm super anti-gun, and I don't, what I mean? That's not the important thing. I'd much rather, Hollywood, a major studio restructure itself so that it actually gives, again, people of color and people who are, don't have certain economical status or certain social status to actually have a chance to produce work. I'd much rather have that than,
because a lot of the things are just like repetitive.
What I would say that's very interesting, though, is something like The Wire. You ever watched The Wire? I know I mentioned it in my paper.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Yeah, I've watched like one episode.
The show The Wire is interesting because while it does fall on stereotypical tropes, if you will, it's different than other cop shows because what it did is that it took, you saw one side, which was the cops, right? And then, you also saw one side, which was the street gangs. And that was in Baltimore. And this entire show was based off of these two sides kind of going head to head. And even on the fifth season was about media. It was about media representation in newspapers and magazines, and actually how the media took advantage of the gangs and overblown things that weren't actually gang related. So I think, if we that's a show that did it. Do you know what I mean? That was talking about it. But I think it's so fascinating. I wrote this. It always stuck with me. I found the quote later for my paper too. It was that McNulty, who was one of the lead stars of it, and spoiler alert to people out there, spoiler alert. But McNulty was trying to catch gangs, and Stringer Bell was played by Idris Elba, right? After his demise, or sort of like that, McNulty goes into his apartment, Stringer Bell's apartment, looks around, and then turns and says, basically to the camera, to the American audience, who the hell have they been chasing for all these years? Because his apartment wasn't some
typical.
It was typical of the young Wall Street guy's apartment, right? Yeah. And it's so fascinating because there it is again. McNulty was a victim of this kind of stereotyping, right? And here he was in a show which really played both sides of it. And him turning basically to the audience and saying, who the hell what is going, you know what I mean? Have everything we've been said, was it all a lie? Like who the hell have I been catching all these years, right? I've been chasing all these years. So it's to kind of maybe go back and answer your question a little bit. That's an interesting show to watch because that kind of tells you, gives you a little bit of both sides, but keep in mind it does paint, gangs in a stereotypical way too. So you have to keep that in mind as well.
It's fascinating because we have to find a way to maybe not eliminate those roles because then again I think they still need to be portrayed, but to find a way to have them but not one dimensional.
Well, I think it's interesting now. I've always said one way we could help representation in films in general. Kind of like what we did for our thesis, actually, was we didn't make a film. You don't have to make a film about race, right? But make a film, and hire diversity and hire people hire people of color and people of different backgrounds to actually play those parts. And, doesn't have to be about race or something like that. Right. And I think, it's interesting because I think that's what Sidney Poitier was kind of saying. I think that's one way to go. I think we get a little, now it's kind of again, it's a good time because a lot of people are talking about it, if you ask me. So it's a really good time. And I go back to Don Lemon because I was watching him again. And he's right. He said, are we going to go too far? And he's talking about the monuments. He said, are we going to go too far? For sure, but then we're going to come back, right? And I think and then you're seeing that with Hollywood, right? Where they're going to make eligibility for the Oscars has certain diversity eligibility, which I actually agree with because I think it may force people to, finally, mess up the system. And maybe getting off race a little bit, but and it's something I know you've seen, right? Network,
right?
I think something like that is interesting because while Network is not about race, it doesn't talk about it doesn't have maybe like that racist stereotypes in them. Not in all places. There's some places in the film, but I think that's on purpose. Something like Network, right, actually talks about the influence of media, right, and actually talks about how far media goes to create a story, right? You take someone like Howard Beale, who's basically having a mental breakdown on live television. And because the numbers went up, the media decides, hey, we're going to give him his own show, and we're going to build this entire news circle around him, right? And even shows how the media actually destroys causes, right? The whole thing with kind of the Black Panther-esque movement that they're having, right? Where they wanted to go in and create a show around, and Patty Hearst was there, right? Because she had taken to the movement. You have 2 scenes with them, right? Well, I think was it Black Liberation Army? I forget what they were called in the film. But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
The scene, she's talking about how all their values and whatever, and then the second scene, they're in the house and they're all arguing over percentage. Right. But it just shows how far the media goes to disrupt the message, right? Even something like that, it disrupts the message.
Yeah.
And what I think it's so fascinating, talk about the Oscars, Network was literally putting up a mirror and saying, hey, everybody, look at what's happening, right? Here is a reflection of what's happening, right? And the Oscar, didn't win Best Picture, right? It didn't win Best Picture. And what won Best Picture instead? Rocky. And I love Rocky. It's a great film. But Rocky, even though Italian Americans have their own kind of bad history in America, Rocky was about rags to riches, man, has one shot at the crown, beats the black man, right, at the end, or draw, right, at the end, right, but he wins the moral race, and now he's gotten his American dream, yippee, yippee, right? That wins Best Picture. And which is really about, hey, listen, look what the media is doing to you. Look what the situation is. Doesn't win Best Picture, but Rocky does. And again, I don't want any Rocky hate mail. I love Rocky.
I love Rocky too, man.
Film,
but one could argue that, listen, The Network is like one of the greatest films ever made. And definitely the message
joke. It was, hey, you're watching media. Here is a media that makes fun of media, right?
Yeah.
And it was just the one scene with Ned Beatty where he says, there is no democracy, right?
Yeah, there is
only, I forget, DuPont.
Yeah, at the end of it.
These are the countries of the world, right? This is the democracy, and such a powerful message of the film, and it has its own problems, obviously. There's no diversity other than the Black Liberation Army.
True.
But it's making a point by that too, right? It's interesting that that's the only thing in it. But it's so fascinating. And then, if I'm not mistaken, it lost to Rocky, which, again, is very debatable. So
I think it's a great note to end on. So like, people, listen, the media, you still have to watch movies. Movies are fun. You still have to watch TV, all of that. That's fun.
Yeah,
we're film
nerds talking about.
Yeah, exactly. But you always have to understand, that they're like, each film that is made, there are people behind behind them, right? And those people, they're trying to convey like a message, right? So you have to understand all of that and to not let films, TV, or even even music, no, don't let them put a stereotypical thing in your head. So watch films, watch TV, but just make sure you understand how this thing works. At least a little bit. Anyway, Peter, what's the anything else you want to add?
No, I think you summarized it great, and I think absolutely, you have to uh, watch everything that you can, and just dissect everything, and understand. Like, that's what I was saying about celebrities. Understand celebrities are brands, so I think don't put too much. Don't wait so much on Hollywood. They should use their platform, but at the same time, you know what I mean. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we have to understand, we can't expect so much from it, right?
Right.
Everybody's kind of trying to do different things. But yeah, just
Mhm.
keep the just keep that in mind. But yeah, no, that's I think you summed it up perfectly.
And also, if you have not watched our film yet, King of the Blue Ridge is available on YouTube. Since we mentioned it today, so it's available on YouTube. And yeah, go check it out. Leave some comments, and don't forget to subscribe. So, Peter, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for coming back. I know it's not going to be the last time, because we still have to have some more history episodes. So. Yeah, take care of yourself and thanks again.
Thanks, Perry.